Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Freya Serafina. I'm a women's spirituality PhD student, a filmmaker, an educator, and a bunch of other stuff to pay the bills. I am really trying to settle back in after being on vacation. Well, vacation, it was a work vacation. I was in Trinidad and Tobago for the Film and Folklore Festival. It was an international premiere of my film Reborn. So that was really, really exciting to be there with all these filmmakers, all this really exciting stuff going on, and to be steeped in the folklore of another place and to see how artists and filmmakers from that place brought their folklore to life was really, really cool. So I got to see a ton of stories. I got to meet my partner's family, who I've never met before, and so it was a really, really beautiful time. It was 86 degrees and sunny, and I got back to New York and it was 48 degrees and downpouring. So I'm trying to settle back into the weather and to work and to do my PhD research and all that fun stuff. So thanks for your patience, and now we're back. I was just immersed in stories, and now I'm going to talk about another story that has been radically transformed throughout the ages, and that is the story of Demeter and Persephone. Let's get into it. If someone is generally unfamiliar with folklore and mythology, the ones that they usually do know are the Greek myths. Why is that? Well, they're the ones we're taught about the most in school, in creative writing class, in English class. We often talk about the Odyssey or the Iliad as like great pieces of literature. And they seem to be the most reproduced cinematically or creatively. I mean, Disney's Hercules is a great example of that. But what many people might not know, and admittedly myself, I didn't know this, which I should have, given a lot of my other research, is that a lot of these tales, these myths, these folklores, these stories that we have from Greek myths and a ton of others have been radically transformed over time to fit modern, more patriarchal narratives. Now, why do I say that I should have known that? Well, I'm studying women's spirituality, right? I'm looking at religion and spirituality, and philosophy, really from a woman's perspective, a radical, liberatory perspective, a feminist perspective. And so it should have kind of been obvious and apparent to me that much of Greek mythology and these stories that we have been transformed after, the introduction of patriarchal orders and warring nations and that sort of thing. But why I think we don't generally, unless you're specifically in that field, analyze these myths and wonder about or dissect, what's true, what's not true, what's been changed, what's when it was changed, by who, for who, is because we think of it like ancient history. And we've been taught one particular story over and over and over again that it sort of becomes like cemented in the modern culture. I mean, how many different films have we seen, new literary adaptations that have been created, and we have a general idea of who Zeus is and who Hera is and Athena and Apollo, and we like know these names. I mean, Nike is now a shoe company, right? Like, it's steeped and woven into the fabric of our modern contemporary society that we don't really think about it too much. But I'm thinking about it, so I'm going to tell you about it. Once many Greek societies and surrounding cities and countries and cultures moved away from a matrilineal or egalitarian community, a lot of the goddesses, deities, and stories and myths that we had were hidden, erased, or transformed to fit into a more patriarchal narrative. Now, why do I say matrilineal or matrifocal versus matriarchy? Well, I think there's this idea, if you put the words matriarchy and patriarchy next to each other, that it's just like the inversion of patriarchy, where one group is under the control of another, but that's not what a matrilineal society was. So I don't like to just use the word matriarchy because I think it implies the same thing as patriarchy, just opposite, which is not true. Matrilineal or matrifocal societies valued women. Women were in positions of power, maybe property status, were passed through the mother's line. Women were rulers, a goddess was worshipped, multiple goddesses were worshipped. And where we have matrilineal societies, we also have egalitarian societies, which means that everyone was equal, work was shared, worship was shared. And there's lots of literary and archaeological evidence that proves that both of those things existed and could be very possible today. But I think when we say matriarchy, people who thrive under patriarchy get their back up a little bit, because whether they want to admit it or not, thinking about their experience being flipped and now being under the control of systems or people could be very scary. And I think that's a really interesting thing that happens in people's brains that we'll maybe talk about another time. I digress. In Weaving the Visions, New Patterns in Feminist Spirituality, Charlene Spretnak contributes a chapter titled The Myth of Demeter and Persephone, in which she provides us with more context and backstory around the changing of this myth. She says that the Grain Mother's origins are, in fact, Cretan, and that she has connections with the goddess Gaia and with Isis. Her daughter, also known as Kore, is the grain daughter, and together they represent and embody the new crops of grain. The ancient women of Greece would gather every autumn for a 3-day-long festival known as the Thesmophoria. You can look at these 3 days like a cycle: planting, growing, harvesting. If you watched my last video where I talked about the Trinity and the Maiden, Mother, Crone, and the cycles, here's another perfect example of this pairing of three, these cycles seen in different ways that don't necessarily have the modern connotation of maiden, mother, crone attached. These days were known as Cathodos and Anodos, Nastaya, and Kalagenia, respectively. Cathodos and Anodos meaning downgoing and upgoing, Nastaya meaning fasting, and Kalagenia meaning fair birth. This festival, along with many other festivals of ancient origins, were performed solely by women and were eventually rebirthed into the Eleusinian mysteries. But it wasn't until the 7th century BCE that the tale was rewritten by a man to include the assault of Persephone by Hades. This tale has become a famous tale of assault, in which Persephone is abducted and dragged off into the underworld, forced to marry Hades, and spend her time for 6 months with him every year before returning to the surface. A famous tale of assault. We shouldn't even have those. But prior to this new Olympian tale retold by Isocrates, there was absolutely no mention of assault. There's nothing in the earlier cult of Demeter or the stories thereafter that support the mention of it. Instead, there might be archaeological evidence that supports the addition of this horrible act into the tale. We know there was a flow of communication and information from Egyptian culture and neighboring cultures as well into Greece around this time. And there was a big influence of the goddess Gaia. Both Isis and Gaia could move freely between the underworld, and they would receive the dead. There's other evidence that supports Persephone being an ancient underworld goddess from Attica, and that she was absorbed and transformed after a round of invaders came in from the north. This abduction myth then being a direct link to invasion. Whatever the reason for this shift in the narrative, it's clear that it didn't happen until we shifted away from a matrilineal society into a patriarchal society. I think it's important to remember that wherever these goddesses are from, and whoever they might have originally been, they were mother goddesses associated with power, fertility, death, and cycles of life and rebirth. They were strong women catering to female-driven or egalitarian societies. And it wasn't until patriarchal religion and culture took over that this violence was perpetrated against them. We also start to see war and conquest enter the story more readily, but that's a video for another day. In the story told by Spretnak, there was once no winter, and Demeter looked upon the humans with kindness and affection. Seeing that their lives were difficult, she decided to provide them with grain in order to keep their bellies full. She would dance with her daughter Persephone, and flowers and grain shoots would spring up wherever their feet touched the earth. Life was good. In the shade of trees, Persephone would coax up the smaller grain shoots that lacked sunlight. It was here that she also would see ghosts and spirits hanging about, moaning, pleading, and being confused by their status. Many of them didn't even know they had died. Persephone asked her mother about them, and was told by Demeter that they were lost souls of the underworld. Demeter also told her daughter that she was in charge of these souls and the underworld, but her main focus was on the living, as she thought it should be. But Persephone's heart was kind, and she decided that she would enter the underworld to tend to these souls. This shocked Demeter and filled her with grief, but her daughter's heart was set on it. So, Demeter opened a tunnel for Persephone to enter the land of the dead. Persephone gathered 3 poppies and 3 sheaves of wheat. She was also given a torch. After descending into darkness for many hours, she finally reached the underworld, where she heard the moans of the dead. She conjured a bowl of pomegranate seeds, the food of the dead, and called out to them, "I am Persephone, and I have come to be your queen. Each of you has left your earth body and now resides in the realm of the dead. If you come to me, I will initiate you into your new world." The spirits walked towards her glowing aura, and as each spirit passed her, she crushed a pomegranate seed and marked their foreheads with the juice, proclaiming, "You have waxed into the fullness of life and waned into darkness. May you be renewed with tranquility and wisdom." Persephone did this for months, while her mother walked the earth, longing for her daughter to return to her. In her sadness, Demeter forbade any new growth upon the earth. One morning, a ring of purple crocus quietly pushed its way through the soil and surrounded Demeter. She looked with surprise at the new arrivals from below and thought what a shame it was, as she was too weakened to feel rage at her injunction being broken. She then leaned forward and heard them whisper in the warm breeze, "Persephone returns! Persephone returns!" Demeter leapt to her feet and ran, rejoicing and calling out about Persephone's return. Grass began to grow, flowers burst forth, and animals shed their winter skin. Persephone ascended from a dark chasm, and the 2 women embraced and rejoiced. Humans saw the miracle of Demeter's bliss and rejoiced every spring at the new growth around them. Spretnak tells us that each winter the mortals joined Demeter in lamenting the absence of her daughter, and wait along with her to see Persephone's return from the underworld. That's a much nicer story, if you ask me. This is a story of cycles, of death and rebirth, of the changing of seasons, of sadness into joy, joy into sadness, and back to joy again. There is no mention of assault, marriage, or even a king of the underworld at this point in the tale. Many people have already tried to add a feminist twist to the tale in regard to the marriage between Persephone and Hades. And that's fine. I think it's great to take stories that have to do with violence and reimagine them into something better, something more beautiful. And also, that's what creative license is for, right? But in reality, there is no Hades beckoning Persephone to join him. Beckoning being a nicer word. There was only Persephone and her compassion for the lost souls of the dead, and Demeter and her love for her daughter. This woman-led cultic tale and this female divine worship is something that we should examine. And it's a great story about mothers and daughters, a great feminist tale that all children can enjoy. The entrance of men into this story is only done so through deep violence and force. It's only then that we get mention of a prominent male figure in this tale. And I also think that is a deep injustice to men. But I'll let you think about that one. If you want more videos like this, like, subscribe, hit the bell, and let me know what you'd like to hear about next. Bye!